Hello, this is the Death Row and Executions channel. I am Paco Rivera. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more Death Row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Also, check out my other channel here on YouTube called The Maximum Sentence, where I cover recent crimes and convictions. There will also be a link for that. Well, I didn't think Florida would schedule another execution so close to Christmas and that I would get a break. But here we are. A few weeks ago, on November 18th, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a death warrant for what is set to be the 19th execution in that state this year. Now 58-year-old Frank Athen Walls is scheduled to be executed on December 18th for a crime that he committed when he was 19 years old. In the year 1987. Frank Walls actually began killing in the year 1985 when he was 17 years old. And later he committed 2 other murders before the 1987 killings, but investigators wouldn't link him to those crimes until several years later after his 1987 arrest and after his conviction and death sentence. During the early morning hours of July 22nd, 1987, Frank Walls broke into the mobile home occupied by 22-year-old Edward Alger Jr., who was an airman stationed at Eglin Air Force Base, and his girlfriend, Ann Peterson, who was 21 years old. The mobile home was located in the Ocean City region of Florida in the Florida Panhandle. Today, that city has a population of just a little over 6,000 residents, and it's located about a 10-minute drive from Eglin Air Force Base. When the intruder, Frank Walls, broke into the mobile home, both Ed and Ann were still asleep, and they were startled by noises coming from inside their home. Frank Walls had knocked over a fan while entering the home. When Ed and Ann came out of the bedroom to see what caused the noise, Frank Walls pointed a gun at them. He told Edward to get on the floor, and then, using cords from the curtains, he forced Ann to tie Ed's hands behind his back and to bind his ankles. She was forced to do this to her boyfriend. He also ordered Ann to gag the mouth of her boyfriend. He then told Ann to lie on the floor, and he restrained her in the same manner, using a knife to cut the cords and gag. Edward, however, managed to free himself from his restraints, and he proceeded to attack the intruder, but Walls was still holding a knife, and during the struggle, he cut Ed's throat. Ed managed to bite Frank Walls' leg so badly that it caused Walls to drop the knife, but that is when Walls retrieved his gun again, and he shot Ed Alger in the head 3 times, killing him. Walls then walked over to Ann Peterson, who was by this time frantically crying and in tears and trying to scream and speak through the gag. For some unknown reason, Walls decided to untie her hands and ankles, and he removed the gag from her mouth. And that's when Ann, bear in mind, we got this information from Walls' confession much later. Anyway, that's when Ann attacked Walls, and during the struggle, he shot Ann in the head, killing her. Edward was scheduled to report to an Air Force base later that morning, and when he failed to show, his superior officer, Sergeant John Calloway, went to Edward and Ann's mobile home. He was able to get inside, and that is where he discovered the nude body of Ann Peterson on the floor. Sergeant Calloway immediately went back outside, and he notified police. After police arrived, they also found Edward's nude body in the home. Remember, they were both in bed asleep before confronting the intruder. Now, here is where things get a bit interesting. A neighbor of Edward and Ann, living in the mobile home adjacent to them, told police that he was once a roommate of Frank Walls and that he heard loud noises coming from the mobile home of the victims earlier that morning. And here's the kicker, that he looked outside and he saw Frank Walls in the area. Based on that information provided by Walls' former roommate, investigators tracked down the current residents of Frank Walls' mobile home, obtained a search warrant, and while searching the home, they recovered various items that were later proven to have come from Ed and Ann's home. And they found other items that would later be confirmed as belonging to a 47-year-old woman named Audrey Gygi, the victim of an unsolved murder in Ocean City. However, the state decided that they will only be able to charge Walls at this time with the murders of Ed Alger and Ann Peterson, saying that they don't have enough evidence to indict him for the murder of Audrey Gygi, since simply having some of her personal items in his possession found a few months after her murder was not enough evidence. About a year after the crime, in 1988 now, Walls was ultimately convicted after being found guilty of the murders of Edward Alger and Ann Peterson. He was sentenced to life in prison for Edward's murder, and he was sentenced to death for Ann's murder. A few years later, however, Walls was successful with an appeal and he got a new trial. Same exact result. According to reports, even though Frank Walls was not indicted for the murder of Audrey Gygi, her sister and others in the family had attended the trials, hoping to see the man that they believed killed Audrey punished for his crimes. And then, 6 years later, with advancements in DNA, investigators compared DNA recovered at the crime scene where Audrey Gygi was killed with Frank Walls' DNA. And they got a positive match. And Frank Walls was then officially charged with that murder. In 1993, a grand jury indicted Walls for the murder of 47-year-old Audrey Gygi, who was stabbed to death inside her trailer home sometime around May of 1987 during a robbery of the home. It is believed that he had also indecently violated Audrey. Semen was found on the bedsheets, which is how investigators obtained biological evidence later compared to Walls' DNA. Investigators say that Audrey was allowed to shower before she was killed, which is why no biological evidence was found on her body. By the way, Audrey's mobile home happened to be just 1 block away from the one where Ed Alger and Ann Peterson were killed. As prosecutors prepared for trial, Frank Walls' attorneys approached prosecutors to make an agreement with the state that Frank Walls wants to make a deal. He would give them 2 more names of women that he killed that they haven't linked him to yet, and confess to those 2 other murders if he can plead no contest to the murder of Audrey Gygi, and that they won't seek another death penalty for him, and that they don't prosecute him at all for the 2 other murders that he will tell them about. He's already on death row, so who cares, prosecutors must have thought. He's not going anywhere. The state accepted and agreed to Walls' conditions. In keeping with his agreement with the state, Frank Walls confessed to also killing 19-year-old Tommie Lou Whiddon and Cynthia Sue Condra, who was 24 years old. When Frank Walls was 17 years old in 1985, he had been arrested on a charge of cruelty to animals and for being a peeping Tom, looking into people's windows. And Probably because of his age, he didn't get any jail time. Instead, he was sentenced to a period of community service. And while doing community service on Okaloosa Island, he came upon a 19-year-old young woman named Tommie Whiddon while she was sunbathing. Walls, carrying a knife, approached Tommie and slashed her throat. I'm not sure what the motive was. According to the state, when Walls confessed to these other murders, he was not required to provide those details. So maybe it was an attempted robbery, or maybe he wanted to violate Tommie, or it was simply a thrill kill for the fun of it. The following year, in 1986, Walls killed Cynthia Condra, who was a 24-year-old mom of 3. She was stabbed 21 times, and her body was dumped in a wooded area. Once again, Walls gave no details on the circumstances of that murder and no motive for the crime. The state of Florida admits that if Walls hadn't confessed to those 2 unsolved murders, they would probably have never been solved. And as I described, the following year, in 1987, Frank Walls killed 3 more people. I would say this officially makes Frank Athen Walls a full-fledged serial killer. I want to take this moment to wish everyone a Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah. I hope you all enjoy the holidays with your dear family and friends, and a very Happy New Year to all of you. Please be responsible so that you keep yourself and your loved ones safe. And I will see you again next year. My name is Paco Rivera. Thank you for watching. Take care, and bye for now.